Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to another chapter of Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It. Written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Free Wada. We are back here today into the final parts. Part 4 being two pieces and an epilogue afterwards. And we just had a crazy intermission. Intermission could have been its own part fours into an intermission into these being part fives. It was insane. We had what was it, like a little bit over an hour of different just bits of lore, each character kind of going through their own journey. Uh just absolute craziness. Did we I'm trying to remember, did we actually get Victor last time? I think it was like Vi, Caitlyn, Echo, Powder. Uh, we even saw Sky again, Jace going crazy, Mel, all this stuff. And I think it ended with Jace doing some terrible stuff and Vi basically beating the snot out of him. What was it at the end? Yeah, the booms. Yeah. Oh, yeah, but then Powder came back right at the end, too. So, with that, though, let's read the author's notes at the end of the chapter and let's get on with it. So, the notes are one step closer to the end, folks. This chapter and the next are monsters in terms of word count. As a result, parts of Victor's POV is shorter here, but will be longer next chapter. Thank you to everyone again for coming on this adventure with me. It has been incredible. I'll be the judge of if the word count means it's more time to read, though. Y'all, let's get back into it with part 4. It's never over, Orpheus. We are in the perspective of Powder. Just when she thought the biggest surprises were behind her, the universe got creative and malicious. She had thrown the bomb up, lessening the severity of the blast like a man who flinches in preparation for a punch. At the last second, she had been unsure if martyrdom was her thing, and more importantly, terrified of surviving and Vi dying. Powder refused to be the reason that there was a world without Vi. Vi had once told her that she was stronger than she knew. She was in the house Piltover gave to her, and Victor. This was beyond strength. It was the agony of being forced back into her body, pulled from the underworld through her each layer of grave dirt and thrown into the world of the living, and then back again. She was graduating. After this, she would be certified to even teach in the academy. Not like they'd let her. Ouroboroses of agony and over again. If this was death, then she was in hell. The world of the living hated her and wanted her exorcised. Fluorescent green lights swung back and forth in front of her eyes, having her beg for darkness. Someone was brushing her hair and all the colors were muted, like old Halo film reels and gramophone stories. The man, with large calloused hands and a gentle touch, was putting her hair into the old updos because she had only just made it into adulthood. Making it to adulthood was a triumph, a rarity, and a gift, all at once. She must have looked silly, knew it to her core that she'd always looked a little silly, but this was a gentleness she'd felt undeserving of. Victor would often tell her to take time, take breaks, let herself take nice things. This wasn't a small kindness, this was the attention of the hound of the underground. The calloused hand set the brush down at her side. Vander had tried doing her hair when she was younger and had accidentally chopped the strands off in different lengths and sizes. In the time since her departure from the Undercity and his departure from life, he had learned to use his hands for artistry instead of violence. It wasn't only him, but also Benzo, Milo, and Clagger. In the corner were the faintest traces of her parents. The afterlife welcome party was all here. She could feel something traveling up her arm, her veins, her pulse. The slow climb of it through her body had her throwing back her head and screaming. There was a knock at the door. Benzo was sitting in her favorite armchair, so he had to struggle to get up from the comfy seat. There was easy laughter here and no urgency. Benzo waved a hand at her and said he was going to get the door because her silver dress shouldn't get dirty. She made a joke back at him. I can hardly move in it. Everything had the leisure to move slowly, and the molasses march of it all soothed her. She began to beg and plead. Powder, yesterday, would have said that she preferred death to being made powerless again. Was there consolation in knowing anyone would have begged in her place? No one could withstand this. Her body tried to expel the otherworldly void that had wrapped around her organs, but it wouldn't relent. Benzo opened the door and he fell backwards. No, he was thrown backwards by a force. She didn't hear the shot, but she knew it was there. Powder stood dumbly, the dangling earrings clanked against her neck. She was too well dressed to do much of anything for anyone. Piltover had made her weak. Vander stepped towards the door and he received the same fate. She then watched each of her brothers follow them to their graves. Milo and Clagger, too, gone in an instant. Gloved hands were holding her face. No, someone was grabbing her face and forcing it back to get a look at her neck. The slow trickle becomes a rushing flood. The sting of the pinch to her jugular sent her rattling and spinning down corridors of spasms. She ran and turned away from the darkened threshold. She screamed in the walls of her mind, "I don't want to know." But all fools do eventually turn around and see what has been following them. At the doorway, she saw a ragged and raw version of herself. Her hair was still braided, but she was adorned with pistols and weapons that would make all of Piltover grimace and cry. Despite her hair down and the elegance of a wish to wear to the grave, this aspect inside of her would not let go. No, this aspect was her, and trying to disassociate who she was currently from who she could be was naive. Powder almost verbally greeted herself at the door. Luckily, she thought better of it. Any version of herself couldn't resist the chance to mock and cajole. Jinx at the door held in her hands a beating core of blue potential, adorned with arcane runes. She shoved it towards herself. Powder shook her head. The woman at the door shook her head at the same time. The Jinx at the door couldn't cross the threshold and began to weep. I only wanted to help. I only wanted to help. I only wanted to... That's enough, Singed! An unexpected advocate, a voice unseen in the place she was putting on. Blissful darkness arrived, and the pain somehow stopped. The house and stage began to crumble, and with it all the paper dolls of the past were shredded. The dreams persisted alongside her sleep, not so easily deterred. They came in heavy and deep waves. Childhood drawings popped to life to eat the papier-mâché Jinx. Her hair came further undone from the braids and she was lost under the rolling current. Her sister, Powder knew it to the depths of her soul, held her under the waves. Powder, you're stronger than you think. The first day in the academy, they handed her a worksheet of basic arithmetic, and the instructor made a face when she quickly passed it back completed, commenting that she shouldn't doodle in the margins. Victor came for her that day and awkwardly chuckled as she flung herself around his torso for an embrace. The second day, they gave her the parts of a whale oil lamp and asked her to assemble it. Her hands were greasy with the material of the dead creature, and her guilt was high when she had returned the device in working condition. Then, they'd started to time her ability to complete the tasks they gave. Victor was familiar with the working conditions and gently reminded her not to swear at her teachers, at least not to their faces. The third day, she helped her lab partner, a nice-smelling girl 4 years older than her, with assembling wires and tracking them to their proper vestibules in a handheld device. The girl had given Powder 3 vials of perfume to help with the smell that everyone said was on her. Powder happily took the vials and began to notice that on their own they smelled nice, but mixed together they made her eyes water. When Powder asked if Victor had come of age, he laughed a little. What cause of doubt had made her consider him not of age? Powder explained he had no tattoos. Nearly every adult in Zon had ink they'd use to commemorate their life, and that if he ever wanted to go back to the Undercity, he should get a tattoo. Victor had made a small face and mumbled something, looking down at his hands and lap, about it being against the word. Powder would learn to leave him alone when he got like that. The fourth day, while the class moved away from calculus and pivoted towards geometry, a fact that pleased Powder, an older boy had started glaring, pushing past her, and subtly making himself known as an antagonist in the scenes she was cast in. The older girl shooed him away and told Powder it was nothing to worry about, so Powder didn't tell Victor. The 5th day, Powder received a tinderbox from another girl who liked to camp, sit in the backyard of her mother's country house, and who had forgotten to do her equation translations. She complained about Powder's handwriting while she copied the worksheet of the Undercity girl with no last name. Powder must have looked down at her shoes in just the right and pathetic way, because the girl apologized. Piltover was full of snitches, apparently, because when an instructor pulled them both aside, the tinderbox gifter girl claimed that Powder had copied off of her. This was a competitive world, and the elder couldn't live with the embarrassment that she had needed the help of a 12-year-old Undercity sump rat. Powder told Victor none of this. The 6th day, Powder loaded the vials of perfume into half an old bottle of cider with a half chemical-soaked rag. She had ambitions to blind the enforcers who liked to stand around the stone steps of Piltover's theater atrium. It went off in class instead. Left it sitting under the sun at a window, and the bottle magnified the heat onto the rag. It was nothing destructive enough to get her in trouble with the instructors. It was enough to have her classmates let the watchful boy take his retribution of her. The 7th day, classes started to challenge her with the introductions of axioms and advanced theorems. It didn't help that her language arts were garbage. The grass is greener on the other side. Grass can be green? Even Victor, patient and usually talented, stumbled over a language barrier that separated him from the metaphors. He told her that she'd just have to memorize them until the repetition became a familiarity. Children should be seen and not. Victor implored her to focus. Touched, Powder implored him to realize this was a waste of time. He had made such a sad face, a crumbled and shocked expression, with a dumbstruck, partially open mouth. For an hour he gently asked questions of her until she screamed at him that he was being weird. Finally he sighed and let her draw for the rest of the day. You have to remember to be careful what you say here. Even a small joke can get you into trouble, Powder. The perfect, unhappy accident arrived on the 8th day, wrapped in the prelude of Powder kicking scuffs on the floors outside of her classroom and waiting for Victor. Cloying panic had created creative situations in the theater of Powder's mind, where he was dead from a lab explosion, or an enforcer took his life when mistaking him for a lame-legged criminal. The boy from class, nameless in her mind and nameless to this day, turned around the corner, and they had stared each other down. He had come on the cue of her imagination getting brutal with itself. They entered an understood agreement when Powder bolted for the exit, onto the lawn and towards an outcropping of trees at the edge of the academy. Piltover needed to farm timber and refused to debase themselves to foreign markets, unless they were the ones controlling the deals. Every day she was reminded of her limitations. Heavy footfalls and curses had her hiding and praying. I'm not going to hurt you, he yelled after her, now actively searching for her footprints in the muddy, dead leaves of the tree farm. It's just a little hazing. You're a girl, too, so it won't be so bad. It happens to everyone who they take from the Undercity. Powder could hear his agitation in the way his voice pinched. There's not enough resources to go around, kid, and if you're already doing better than me, they could send me back to the lanes. I can't go back. I have parents and I need this scholarship. Powder held her breath and shook her head to herself. That cripple who picks you up every day took his lumps just like you're going to have to. She could imagine it vividly, whereas for so long she had struggled to pin Victor's age and the idea he'd ever been young. They'd probably taken Victor's cane, and of course, he had been as small as Powder. Made it so he couldn't do anything as the Piltover kids ordered the Undercity charity cases to establish a recreation of order and structure. All of Victor's advice to her had been based around days like this. It was the snap she needed. A deep feeling and memory in her of Vi standing up to some kids who had pinned the smaller Echo to the pavement. Her sister's voice had asked her an important question. You gonna let this asshole say that? Powder waited until right before the boy walked past the tree trunk she had plastered herself behind. She rushed his ankles, biting his Achilles tendon and sending him sprawling in the mud. Powder couldn't stay on top of him, so she'd keep him down. She shoved leaves into his eyes and knew to dodge the hands that went to grab at her instead of pushing himself off the ground. She messily kicked his stomach, but it was enough to knock the wind out of him. Again, another kick that had him coughing and retching. They weren't strong kicks, but they were placed in the spots that Powder calculated were hurt for weeks after. Crotch, torso, hands. It wasn't her sister's lesson in fighting, which studied the art of her own body and its inherent assailant abilities. Powder, to succeed on her own, had to understand her limitations and the limitations first of her opponent and work backwards. As an aside from someone I watch who does very good in like strategy-based video games, it's all about finding the weakness and how to exploit those weaknesses when you're trying to win a match like that. Aside over. She went too far because Powder realized she wasn't in the tree farm anymore, and she had bitten a teacher who had been alerted to drag her by her collar. There was a lot of shouting. The boy had just started being patronaged, brainwashed, by a middling merchant of Clan Pharos, and of course they would be pissed when their new Undercity investment came back looking like a brawler. It wasn't even that he had been hurt. It was that Powder had made him look momentarily unpretty. Powder stared at the floor while four adults screamed at her. When a lull arrived, finally someone asked the questions that no one wanted to. Why were they in the tree farm? Victor had been there the whole time. Someone had finally found him and he had been close to the doorway. Powder's head had snapped up at his voice, quiet and accented. He was painted into the corner until asking that question, sharp in a point of the plot that painted Powder in a light that was more nuanced than feral goblin in the Undercity. Suddenly, they remembered she was 12. Just like when he had found me under the rubble. Powder watched her life move through mistakes and Piltover. She reached until she felt herself coming apart at the seams. In the darkness of her memory, she saw blue light and the potential to reshape it all. The Arcane beckoned to her through the undertow of purple and pink waves. If she wanted to die, then clearly not enough because she was going to keep fighting. She was smart, which interested Piltover. She was neither respectful or obedient, which angered Piltover. 22 years old and I still know nothing. I don't know a damn thing. Then learn. Try and learn. Arcane ruin and arcane splendor were before her in the shape of a bisected dodecahedron. The gravitational pull of her curiosity and the item's powers brought both her hands to its sides. It should have burned. It should have hurt. It did neither of those things. She twisted the knobs and the runes glowed happily. Purple tendrils twisted around her neck and arms and through wounds in her stomach and torso. She kept going. Again, that new feeling was coming over her. It was like doors in an old house that had been long forgotten were just now being unlocked. She teetered on the cliff's edge, simultaneously Powder and someone else. No, not someone else. She would always be her, always be Powder. Powder hadn't fallen down a well or died. Powder would go through a glorious evolution. Powder and the girl at the threshold, Jinx, would be one and the same, and there would be no feud between them. She was breathing in more water, or something else entirely than oxygen. Drunk on it was an understatement. Powder spun the device, hands burning, but without burns, purple. There was a smeared and borderless second where she enjoyed all that she was, potential, monster, inventor, and sister. She floated to the bottom with the Arcane in tow, and the world was momentarily okay, but only for a moment. Good time for a water break. Powder wanted to not awaken, but Powder awoke. She might as well have been kicking and screaming, being dragged back, but nevertheless she did. In a musty room, at a chair behind an imposing desk. Excuse me. It was like someone had done a crappy collage of the timeline of events. Powder deciding the story should end on the bridge mashed with her force to return to the Undercity, and then melted into the present sensations beating against her skull. Alongside the pulsing in her skull, she felt dried tracks of snot and blood down her lips and chin. Her torso was whole, but even brushing her hands against her stomach sent painful spasms up to her throat. She then looked down at her hands and winced. Purple lines traced her capillaries, and she became acutely aware of how fragile she was, how easily her flesh and body could be sliced, destroyed, or mutilated. Her near-death experience as a child had not inspired caution. The opposite, in fact. This event was different. There was no time to heal in the comfortable world Victor had built around her as best he could against the onslaught of Piltover nonsense. There were no windows, only one kerosene light, and a mountain of papers and ashtrays atop a leather desk. I had a feeling you'd rather awaken in a place that wasn't a laboratory. I don't come here often, so excuse the mess. Silco, the new ruler of Zon, hadn't handcuffed her to the chair. Was this still a dream? Was it arrogance? Almost certainly both, and neither, and everything. She was still in hell and only slowly coming to a semblance of her usual verbal capabilities and characteristic snide remarks. You'll need some time to recover, so I wouldn't recommend attacking me. The shimmer must find a place to settle in your body. The industrialist of Zon had clearly been injecting himself with shimmer before Powder's return to consciousness. A filament syringe, the kind with the thin needles for reaching the most delicate arteries, was on the desk alongside everything else. It must have been painful. Powder wanted to retort at him, wanted to throw every swear and curse and calamity, promise, but there was a thick and fuzzy weight on the tip of her tongue. It tasted sweet and rotting, the high signs of shimmer. She knew that if she opened her mouth, she'd vomit all over the floor. Powder then finally found a question she was willing to risk humiliating herself for the answer. Where's Victor? She realized she had made a mistake in asking. This cretin maybe already knew how much she cared about him, but by asking, Powder had confirmed it. It was like she had just entered the game with her cards face up on the table. Silco furrowed his brow and turned his full attention to her. You'll be happy to know that he's in another room, unconscious. Silco wasn't lying. At least that's what Powder could gather. But she guessed the information was in no way free. I believe you're already aware that his condition is terminal, gray lung. It's what we, us chosen few survivors of the mines, used to call it. Her glasses were gone, so she had to squint angrily at her knees. I imagine that you thought you'd bring him back topside. Have a good doctor fix him just like they did with the faulty back brace. What was the saying? Ah, yes. If it hurts, then it's working. Stop! Everything around her was casting colors of aches and exhaustion. I's already dead, so you don't have to torture me with a hard-won speech or fable. There it is. Her bite was still there, even when she was at the bottom of the gutter. She hadn't been spared on the return voyage, but she still had some of her meddling persona. And please, trying to intimidate me with the prognosis that any back-alley surgeon could give? Try harder. Break my fingers or kill me like a normal person. His one good eye narrowed and the strange other eye flashed. I only ask that you listen to an experience. After that, I'll let you see the scientist. I should have put that on the genre ban list too. She had an idea what he wanted from her and needed every scrap of humor left in her arsenal to get through the reality that she didn't get to escape into oblivion. The twitching and the sense of unease came and went and returned like the tides. She didn't believe he'd let her see Victor either. No, he was about to make her suffer. Surely, right? That has to be it. Ever wonder what it's like to drown? A story of opposites. There's peace in water. It holds you, whispering that every problem will fade away. He spoke quietly, and she tried not to consider how she'd felt living through life on the border between existing and not. But there's something in you, lighting every nerve in your body and asking if you've truly had enough. Do you know who gifted me this experience? He had been wronged. They all had been in some way or another. Powder and her family had lived in a perpetual circle that went round and round, like the disc and record machine in Vander's bar. Either they were wronging each other or wronging another or being wronged. Was it Vi? He shook his head. No, not your sister. He seemed pleased by her answer. even if it was wrong. It was her mentor, Vander. He wasn't the man you thought he was. Long ago, he was my brother, and a leader of Zon, and a dreamer. That was until he lost himself. And ultimately, it was what killed him. Now your sister has gone off a path worse than him. Even I cannot condone the conclusion she's landed on. The things the good Dr. Sinch had told me about her, they make even my associates blanch. Powder rubbed snot and blood away from her nose. Why? Powder ignored the eager part of her to know what Victor had made for Vi. Because it's saddening what happens when one fancies themselves a hero above all else. Powder grimaced. She had figured, always assumed really, that Vander had gotten his hands dirty in the whispered rebellion that Vi had said killed their parents. It was so obvious. They played pretend heist games as kids that were all based around the stories they overheard at the last drop. What haunted her most of all were the memories. Powder could remember the heat from the fires of the bridge, and Vi sobbing and making promises with hiccups and shaking hands. There had been the gargantuan silhouette of a man in the flames, striking the figure of an enforcer who couldn't get out a full scream. Vander had emerged from the smoke and looked at the sisters with pity. When Vi had wordlessly asked where their mother and father were, and Vander had no good answer. Their old lives were left on the bridge, and they went to live with him. Powder hadn't even considered that maybe Vi had first started leaving pieces of herself behind that day. I'm sorry, Vander. Powder would only ever know him as the gentle rebel, the man at the bar who would pour her a little syrup and grenadine in her favorite cup, and the old king. In the same way she had never imagined her sister could be alive and have twisted facets of carnage. She suddenly ached for Vi and wondered if her sister's voice would still haunt her now that she was actually dead. Powder felt a strange, jittery sensation overtaking her. So, you took Vi in after you killed him. Nice revenge in the shape of loneliness. Bravo, bravo, bravo. She'd brought something back with her from the depths of the abyss. Not just her sass, but also a trace of feeling. Did she have power now? Unsure. It just hurt like hell and made her woozy. I built his statue too, said Silco. Vander, even before his death, left lingering ghosts throughout the lanes. Yeah, you've done a real bang-up job with the nation of Zon and all this shimmer technology. I've never seen Kim Barons so proud to peddle their garbage to orphans, so eager to hide in fish crates. Silco made a tutting noise. Any different from your second-hand scientist? He worked to develop the very technology that has left much of your home behind, forcing us to turn to shimmer. You both foolishly gave your lives and your work to Piltover instead of where you came from. Because of your short-sightedness, your sister has to put everyone at risk and believes that a total erasure of the world is in order. Powder chewed on her cheek until she could taste blood. She ignored Silco's comment on Vi. If he's so second-hand, then how come everyone seems to want to take him from me? It didn't matter what happened now. Vi was dead and Powder was a murderer and she was exhausted. Silco watched her, unblinking. They held each other's stares. Hers was weary and angry, and his was smug, but somehow still blank and distant. Then take him back. Silco reached into his coat and pulled out a crudely assembled, but clearly and painstakingly sharpened knife. He spun the knife on the table so that the handle was facing Powder and the blade was facing him. See if this time you can actually take the life you're aiming for, instead of two unaffiliated enforcers. Look in your eyes as a mirror, child. Powder almost missed what he had said. Determined to close the door on the second person threatening the few people she cared about, her hands began to shake. Your sister is alive. You know it to be true. You also know that she's attempting to use the technology that you and your friend created for an end that could destroy everything. I admit my teachings were not what your sister needed, but she seeks to turn this world into something it was never meant to be. Powder's hand twitched, looking at the knife. You couldn't just hold the bomb in your hand and exit spectacularly? When she had pulled the pin, she'd become a god-killing star, but a terrified and selfish one. Of course not. She's my sister. I love her. It's as simple and stupidly complicated as that. Ransoming me off to her isn't gonna work. Maybe it would. Her sister had always been a little crazier than her, more determined and more unstoppable. Killing me will wreck her. Would it? She's already got a scientist in Victor, and a blue-haired sidekick in the shape of Caitlin. My plans include neither option. Silco spun the knife again, and made 2 rotations before returning to the place it had previously been. Despite failing to eliminate your sister, you did successfully deal with the sheriff and send a statement to Topside in the form of destroying their blockade. Well done. I was considering how I would cut that loose end after his betrayal. Your sister originally impressed me with killing Marcus's predecessor. I disliked the Pilty, but I hadn't meant to. I used a firelight bomb. They'd mostly, tell Jace, all said that one of these days she was going to fuck up so bad that she couldn't hit the reset button. Couldn't run to Victor. Couldn't hide away under her bed and wait for their neighbors to be done yelling through the door. Silco stepped his fingers together. I do hope you remember the last conversation we had. Was that just another one of your deflections, or do you mean to help the home that you've forgotten? They'd kill me if I go back to Piltover, Powder said as the shape of the future adapted to a more solid stroke. She wasn't dead. She needed a plan again. No, they'll send you to Stillwater. Death would almost certainly be a mercy in that case. Unsaid was the offer. Work for us here and we'll find someone else to blame. Powder could bet that Vi had been given those same options years ago. You could be respected here. Beloved even. Many in the Undercity know of the girl you once were, and the negligence that drove your siblings. And they ignored me then. Benzo and Vander had been exceptions. Milo was her brother, but he had reminded Vi and anyone who'd listened that Powder wasn't his sister. Milo had said it right to her face, too. Vander's great, but I'm unlucky enough. I don't need some little jinx ruining my life. He blamed enforcers for the death of his parents and then blamed Powder for everything else that went wrong for him. They love Vi. I'm just an accessory. I'm barely her sister in their eyes. I'll believe you'll be able to show them, truly, what Vander missed when he chose Violet as his heir. Silco pulled out a series of photos and ignored Powder's snide comments on how much space he had down his bra. When the weapons put their backs to the wall, they'll want a champion. Powder ran a finger over Jace's stupid hammer logo on the sheets of stolen or copied paper, ignoring the way the colors around and under her nails looked unnaturally purple. The calculations were spotless. Funny that Jace hadn't had any trouble making these weapons, but it always needed Sky or Victor to correct engineering flaws in tools or buildings. It was so typical and disappointing. Powder shoved the papers angrily into the pocket of her ripped overalls, ignoring that they still had that circular tear from where the crystals had been lodged into her stomach. I have things I want, Powder said as she twisted her back with a satisfying pop. Everything still hurt, but she almost had her body back in place. No more of this bullshit for Victor. He gets to go home, and with whatever power you have over Piltover, you use it to keep him from my messes. Of course. And peace with the firelights. Leave them alone. This irked him beyond measure. His agitation was visible in the way his jaw clenched and how Silco took a deep breath through his nose. The firelights have cost the Barons and I, through their meddling, into Shimmer production. You won't need Shimmer. She hoped the Hextech would be more addictive than the purple drug made and spread through the veins of the Undercity's institutions. Arcane technology belonged to them as much as it did Piltover. It was technically the Undercity that had the mines where the resources could be skimmed off to acquire arcane crystals. Hextech is the language Topside speaks. And if we learn it, then we can write demands they'll listen to. Right now, they see Shimmer as a toxic sludge that belongs down here. Irony, since it saved your life, said Silco, not realizing that explaining why something was ironic was pedantic and annoying. But you're right. With our own weaponized Hextech, Topside will have no more power over us. Shimmer will have me pay a price that I don't know yet. And we won't use those weapons on the firelights or people in the Undercity. No more war among us. No more mob boss nonsense. If we're burning the bridge behind us, then we better build a better one ahead. She reiterated her point, trying to figure out if she was doing any of this right. Was she asking for too much? Too little? This was the equivalent of selling her soul to the king of the underworld for 3 times the retail value. Silco paused, and Powder could have sworn his other eye, the one that remained eternally open, was the one doing the appraising of the soul she was selling. Fine, but understand their leader is Benzo's heir, another contender for control of the lanes. You'll be leading unwilling horses to the drink of their salvation, and the Kimbarans will despise you. Once again, the leniency Silka was affording her either spoke of some twisted nostalgia he had for Vander, or the necessity of her mind and abilities. It could have been both. The unholy trinity of the Undercity reaches for the stars. Benzo, Vander, and now this guy. Cool. I don't care, she lied. In Piltover, if you were an engineer or a chemist or an inventor of any kind, you needed a patronage. Victor had worked her through the motions of political and social ladder climbing, but she had flipped the bird to them all in hopes she could pull a stunt like he had and rise above the thunderclouds that kept her earthbound. How all of that seemed so childish now. This was not what Victor had planned for her, but it was laughably on a beaten, sister, adjacent path. Vi's face on the bridge popped up in the back of her mind. Now show me where Victor is so we can get him out of here. Vi is coming back. It's never going to be over. It's going to circle for eternity. He was kind to you? Silco asked for reasons unknown to Powder. The context of a man betrayed, wronged, and perpetually planning for the next fallout meant that any question he had came with the intention of gain. Gain for a stockpile of tricks tomorrow, or gain for the next second he breathed. She could lie. He'd clearly outmaneuvered her somehow and was thinking of ways to betray the firelights or her. Yet, Powder spectacularly failed to lie. If he had been anything but a nice idiot, then the world wouldn't have snatched him from me. It was how she felt about every scrap of good things she had had. He was quite distraught when we saved you. Silco wasn't being cruel, just observant. She felt sick then. He didn't see. You didn't show him what the doctor... No. Singed has a tenderness for the boy. I trusted his, albeit sometimes ludicrous, judgment. This was equally as weird as having to see her sister become what she was now. In the reflection of the knife's blade, Powder caught sight of her eyes. No more lambent grayish blue. They had gone the color of Vi's hair after a long day of playing on the rooftops. A pinkish fuchsia. Even scarier, she didn't have to squint anymore. Her eyes were clearing and sharpening. Powder had estimated that Vi had been using shimmer and had been fused with it to some degree for years. Powder's own powers, the necrotic energy of the void, wasn't going to be enough in a one-on-one fight. Do you intend to kill her? Silco asked so casually, like Powder hadn't flinched when he said it. Fucker must have read my mind. Silco was now lighting a cigar, seemingly content with the negotiations. To Powder, this meant that she had surely lost something without realizing it. She would never raise a fist to the child you once were. Oh, sorry, that was him. She would never raise a fist to the child you once were, but a snag to her plans, a jinx, or hex upon her luck. I'm not so sure. Someone who stands in opposition to her, like that beloved Firelight boy, must be unwound from the goal, cut out like a cancer. You'd no longer be her sister. You'd be a liability above all else. Powder ground her teeth together and remembered the woman on the bridge. What did you do to her? I tried to free her. I gave her power and safety. She chose this path, girl. Don't fool yourself into believing this revolution wasn't a dream of hers. That's why I have to repossess her toys. Singe told me what she plans to do with the hazardous technology that your desperate and dying mentor built. But if I hadn't intervened, saving you, then this arcane core would have been used to destroy a majority of Piltover and the most of Zon. The event would have been apocalyptic. Powder felt her eye twitch from a memory half buried in a dream. She'd lived 1,000 lives before she had woken up, and she could feel the pain of Shimmer and the pinch of understanding despite having just heard the name of the creation. And how do you know that was her plan? Was it hard to cause the arcane to go haywire? The volatility of the energy and magic's latent extremes had been a roadblock to progress. How did it reach out to me? How could I have dreamt something I've never seen? The enforcer girl on the bridge, taking over a portion of my shimmer refinery, trying to enlist Singe to corrupt the scientist she took from Piltover. I could tell you of her deeds here, what she herself grew to do without my intervention, and what she took from Vander's tutelage. If you're still skeptical she isn't the girl you once knew, betrayal, that pain, can either break you or forge you into something greater. You need to accept that you've both changed. Silco then gestured behind her. Sevica walked forward from the shadows, ignoring the way Vander's adopted daughter scoffed at her from a side eye. Silco was ordering a babysitter for her already. As Powder started to make a quip, Sevica interrupted with a piece of information that she assumed Powder wouldn't find interesting. She was wrong. The Barons aren't happy with the border. Silco saw Powder smirk. She wasn't happy about the problems she had caused for Echo, but any day she could ruin for a Kimbairn was a victory. Shockingly, Silco, the man, was full of contradictions that Powder couldn't pin, turned his anger to Sevica. They've waited for decades for freedom. They can wait an hour or two more as we move the scientists in core to the last drop. Violet should return soon, and I imagine she has one more place she's been planning. He stared at Powder the entire time he spoke the last sentence. Powder raised her hands in mock surrender and followed Sevica to the lift. Right before the doors closed, Powder watched him resheath the knife in his coat pocket. Powder had played Piltover games and lost. She had tried Zone games and lost too. Truly, she was the god's born loser. The shimmer was still beating through her organs and making her nauseous, making the green lights of the elevator stab at the back of her skull. Sevica gave her a silent glare. Powder, remembering how it had felt when Marcus had tackled her to the cobblestone and not feeling particularly forgiving, gave Sevica the finger. Sevica had the audacity to chuckle. You were dead. Great observation skills. I wonder what he'll think when he sees you're back, Sevica said. Powder had to give it to her. It took skill to be this cruel. I wonder if he'll realize you stink of death and a deal with Silco. I don't know what you're talking about. Sevica struck again. Good luck with your sister. I taught her everything Vander wouldn't. Sevica's incredible arms were enhanced with shimmer tattoos, and the muscles were twice the width of Powder's wrist. Powder felt her cheeks flush with frustration. There was no way Sevica knew how she'd failed in the old arcade clubhouse. Paranoia stung anyway. Powder looked down again at her hands. Without strength and without proper guidance, they were noodles attached to the torso. Yet when the elevator doors opened, she found strength enough to run to a corpse-like Victor stuck in the thralls of sleep that would make women who prick their fingers on defunct sewing devices jealous. Unlike a myth, it was actually him. Powder could barely hear herself saying his name. White noise drowned everything out, and she didn't care that Sevica was watching them. Powder had found him. He was sitting, leaned up in a chair like a bad prop. They were in a laboratory, with a beautiful portcullis view to the depths of the rivers near Piltover and the Undercity. Powder went to her knees before him and began to fret that she had come too late. No creepy doctor, and no weird glowing core. He coughed as she shook a bit at his shoulders. Up close, she could see the dark circles around his eyes, how he had no time to take care of his hair, which was starting to stick up and pointy in long waves. And the bones that poked through the skin. On that paper-thin skin was also alarming signs of arcane runic work, like he was a piece of scrap arithmetic done by a careless student. You idiot! Powder wanted him to wake up and tell her to stop calling him that. His leg wasn't even made of flesh anymore, but instead a sinewy metal that was simultaneously heavy and warm like flesh. She hugged him and started to feel her throat close. "You've become a real mythical scoundrel, Vicky." She was about to start begging him to wake up until a gentle, but heavier than normal hand came to rest on her back. "You need to get out of here." "That's really the first fucking thing you say?" He pulled her close, a brutally tight and affectionate hug under the shadow of desperate times. Oh, sorry, that was Victor. He squeezed her, and she awkwardly chortled and started to cry under the intense love. He cradled her head and whispered in her ear, "There is a knife in the lower handle of my crutch." Powder couldn't see Sevica and could only hope the woman couldn't hear them. "You'll need exactly 8 seconds to get up to the main floor." "I know." Powder pulled a bit away so he could see her. Victor must have realized the change in her eyes, because he reached out with his bandaged hand and cradled her face. She pushed it away and lifted his other hand, the one that had been changed through shimmer and had the weight of something ancient, paid for with a heavy price. "I need you to just follow me. Don't look back. Just follow me for a little bit. I'm gonna fix everything." He sighed, weary but bewildered in almost a sweet way. "It's not your job to fix everything, Powder." She choked on anything to say and blinked her strange, unholy eyes at him. "I don't think I've ever seen you speechless." Sevica ordered them both to the elevator. Their reunion was abrupt, and Victor looked at her plainly. She looked back and tried to will every ounce of their friendship and the decade of knowing one another into some sort of helpful twitch of her nose or raise of her brow that told him that she had a plan. They just needed to play along a bit more, and then he'd be free. Victor stared back at her, and perhaps it was the most naive thing she had ever done, but she believed he had trusted her. As he slowly raised, making a meal of the performance of his ascent, Powder flicked her eyes away from the quick way he twisted the second handle of his crutch. Powder needed it. She also had easy access, like grabbing a sword from an open sheath. Why does everyone keep wanting to give me knives? It was such a personal weapon. The lift began to rise. Flashes of green light began to move downward as the lift went up. There was enough space for Powder to lean forward on the rail to the side of the lift and began to whistle. Sevica took in a deep breath and leaned her neck against her shoulder. Successive pops and twists of her shoulders were obnoxiously interrupting the tune Powder was trying to keep. Powder persisted with the tune. She used to beg Vi to play it in the last drop, even though it was hard to dance to. "The devil didn't make me do it, Beelzebub." Sevica popped her knuckles, and the shimmer and powder reacted like a nagging fly buzzing over her shoulder. "What was in that?" she said when she let Marcus grab me. Sevica caught her staring, and deja vu set in. "I never understood why he was so obsessed with you and your sister," Sevica said, and Powder wasn't sure if she meant Silco or Vander. Victor twisted his hands in agitation against his crutch, and only with a self-control that she didn't know she possessed was Powder able to shrug and keep whistling. The woman wanted to get under his skin, but it didn't matter. Powder had been taken under the dragon, Silco's wing. "I always knew you two were a curse on your family and our cause." Powder had made a deal with Silco, not Sevica. Had her warning about the Kim Barons been an indication of her alliance, her fading loyalty, her continual hatred for Vander's children? Powder hadn't failed in her negotiations with Silco, no. She had just forgotten there were other enemies in the shadows. The strain of shimmer reached a breaking point, growing angry and alarmed at even her whistling. Seems inevitable. "Here comes the sun. I open up my eyes." It all happened in a span of fleeting microseconds that would have made Echo even impressed. Sevica had raised her fist, clenched, and as a blade had extended from her knuckles, Powder had already ducked and swerved out of the way. A purple distortion of light followed Powder into the ether. For the time it took Sevica to engage 4 actions. Raise fist, clench fist, attempt to swing. Powder felt herself able to achieve more, go further. The reaction time of most humans was a quarter of a second. Powder knew this from her work trying to engineer the hex claw to a pitch a ball with to pitch a ball without taking off a person's head. It was all a matter of how fast your nerves could send signals to the brain. There were rumors of creatures in Runeterra that could react faster than humans, but Powder wasn't a zoologist. But at that moment, she could have been anything. That miasma of shimmer hang over, parted, and Powder felt like a god. She ducked under Sevica's swing, then behind her, and then leapt to kick the back of her knees. Sevica fell forward into the elevator doors in shock. Before the woman could stand and crush Powder into pulp, Powder had Victor's knife, grabbed from his cane, and sliced for the shoulder blade that was attached to the bone sword the woman had augmented into her physique. Sevica, a champion of Zon and a survivor, spun on her side and caught the blade on her shoulder pads. She was about to push herself to standing. Powder flinched back with raised fists in front of her face, expecting Sevica to rise and retaliate, but a quick swing of a crutch was what stopped the heroic gladiator from twisting Powder into a pretzel. Her head fell to the side, unconscious. Powder turned to Victor, mouth agape and staring at his hand and arm. Victor looked at what he had done and muttered something like an apology or confession, and suddenly it all made sense to Powder. The runes on his flesh, the strange device Silka was stealing from Vi, the dreams she had had. Over their panting and fear, Victor and Powder almost missed the lift doors opening with a belated little bing. The lyrics she had forgotten popped into her head. Why stay clean when the world loves a beautiful junkie? Powder threw her head back and howled with laughter. We're moving into Victor's perspective now. They dragged the concussed woman out of the elevator and into a broad catwalk area that had the sounds of heavy machinery to hide their movement. They were 2 floors away from the upper-level exit according to the seconds he had been counting. Victor used his arm, the new one, the strange and arcane monstrosity, and Powder had to heave the dead weight with her spindly limbs. The shimmer had given him strength and eased some of the pain in his leg. For Powder, she had gained an amount of time, quick reflexes, and powerful reactions. He had watched, momentarily amazed and in awe at the way she had sped through the world at an inhuman speed. If he hadn't known what they had done to her. A similar terror, but more with giddiness, had Powder marveling at him, swearing and cheerleading him as they dragged Silco's guard into an alcove of crates. Deja vu struck Victor. Were he and Powder escaping the eyes of the guests at the Hex Gates? No, he had been taken from Piltover, and Powder had come to save him. And she died trying. She's a fucking loot crate. Powder had begun to go through the woman's pockets, pulling out a flask, deck of cards, and alarmingly, a pistol. Powder was gesturing to Victor, but he found himself unable to move towards her. Victor! He fell forward, back into his body. You're alive. She wasn't listening to him. Her usual banter and sticky fingers were robbing the woman who'd Victor had met the night time had fused together prior. Silco just made my contract null and void, so I don't need to help him move the core anymore. Victor must have stammered out a fragment of his shock because Powder shook her head and tried to explain herself. I don't care if he didn't mean for her to try and murk me in an elevator. I'm positive this is what he had planned for later. Powder. Sevica had my glasses? Powder lifted her crushed spectacles out of Sevica's pocket and examined them with the same quick impatience that he had known to so core to her. He had hoped she would have stayed safe and away. Powder! He shouted, not considering that someone else might hear them, only that he wasn't sure it was her. How could it be her? She had been filled with crystals and so frighteningly quiet. Something had taken her further down the tunnel and into the depths of nothingness, and he had let them use the core on her. His technology had done this to her. I am so sorry. They had already had their argument in what felt like a lifetime ago. Progress day had seemed like such a nuisance to him when he realized that time was limited. Soon, later, after. It was all anyone in Piltover or the Undercity could say until it was too late. Why, he could never understand it. Did it take a disaster to move an ounce of compassion into the setting? Victor had waited for Jace alongside an entire barrage of technicians and planners who had placed their whole careers on Progress Day speeches, being seen by other elites and who needed glamours produced and updone hair. When they had asked him if he could do the speech instead of Jace, instead of his beloved partner, he started to have a panic attack. There was no other way to describe the situation. His anxiety was simply a feature of his life. Powder had bounced towards them from behind, and that was the last conversation they had before. It was his worst nightmare. His first time in Piltover, he had seen what a lab accident could do, an explosion or misuse of materials. And if his last words were not true, but just terrible accusations in the heat of anger and fear. Powder blinked at him through her new eyes, and he knew what they needed to do. No matter what you promised, or what they told you, we must destroy the Arcane core. Victor had seen a bit of what they had done to her. He could trust neither Zahn nor Piltover to not use his creations for their evils. He accepted that he didn't trust himself either. Please, I don't want this anymore. Her eyes went distant, and a glaze came over them. He built weapons. Powder swayed on her feet. We were gone, they built weapons to use on us. Victor had never seen her so eager to argue. She materialized evidence, papers and such, and weirdly waved it at him. Any hope that Silco had made falsified claims to manipulate them died upon Victor seeing his partner's handwriting and the little details that Victor knew that Jace's enemies wouldn't have been able to or cared to add took the wind from his lungs. Jace always signed his notes. At the bottom of each page was the looping J and sharp T. He didn't. He wouldn't do this because of me. Because I was taking, would he? Victor began to feel his lungs constrict and body cry out. Her hand reached out, and without fear she clasped his modified wrist. She was not afraid of him, and he felt shame at the fear he had had of her moments prior. This isn't your fault. You had to build the core to survive. It's not your fault. Punctuating each word a certain way allowed Powder to pull him along. My friend is on his way. We'll meet up with him once he has our stuff, and then we can put a stop to all of this. All of it. We don't need that creepy doctor, Silco, or anyone. Your sister? Powder squeezed his hand like she had all those years ago in a small med bay of the academy after the explosion in Jace's apartment. Every moment and every choice had brought them here. For her acceptance of what he had done to himself in the name of survival, and for the decade of their camaraderie, he would let her lead him. No one stopped them as they went through the auditorium area. Without their champion, Violet, there was no reason for the adherents to show themselves. Silco and Singed must have been hiding in the other half of the tunnels, completely unaware. Victor wondered how deep the pits of the Undercity went, how ancient the valley was, arcane stones, the flowers that made shimmer, the strange creatures like Rio dotted the world right beneath their feet. In the river, there were monsters. He wondered how he was going to return to the world on the other side of the bridge after everything that had happened, and what he had done to himself. When Powder would begin to go the wrong course, Victor corrected her and took them down to the pathway he had mapped out in his mind. It had been an unintentional, wise choice for Violet to knock him unconscious when she had brought him to the Shimmer Refinery and connected tunnels. Foolish to let him spend so much time with Singed. Take him to the meeting place where all of her followers were. Let him understand and listen to the hum of the elevators. Powder froze when she saw the tarp with her illustrated image, and only after some gentle cajoling and urging her to not break into hysterics did they walk past the immortal, sleeping youth that her sister had framed her in. She made me look prettier, said Powder. I never looked that sweet. Victor disagreed, but Powder wouldn't hear it. They walked into the open air. This whole time Victor had been so close and so far. The port and docks they were on were less than a mile away from the bridge. Powder took a deep breath. Victor stepped out from the threshold before her, and fate punished him. A heavy sound came from behind them, deep in the Shimmer Refinery and tunnels of the darkness. He turned to look at Powder, seeing in her mouth the syllables of her sister's name. Powder, he called to her. For some reason, he felt like she had made this choice already before and been burned for it. Please come with me to the water wheel laboratory, Powder. Please. My friend and I tried to cross the bridge. Powder placed her misshapen glasses atop her nose. We were here before, and I almost died. Most experiments require repetition to know if your results were accurate. I can try this again. I can do it right this time. Don't speak my lessons back to me. There's flares in that water wheel lab. Powder was turned on her heel. Everyone demanded that Victor control Powder. How was he meant to do that? She would make the laws of nature bend their knees on account of her love for her sister in the same way he had demanded heaven and hell give him more time on the planet. They truly were one and the same. My friend Eka will know what to do. You can't miss him. Dark skin, long hair, brilliant mind, intense martyrdom complex. He's the whole package. I wish I could have given you a better way to go through your life. You make light of everything and nothing. Another force shook the area and attention began to draw towards the docks. Powder had made this choice long before they had met, years ago, with her sister in an apartment that belonged to Jace Tallis. Victor could understand why she had followed her sister and not looked back. Now, she smiled and winked before running down the pathway to the tunnels beneath. He promised himself that he had not lost her again. But he also had little faith. Powder would reach for her sister with the best approximation of an outstretched hand. Violet, to him, only had closed fists. But you've been wrong before. She's a person and a child of Zon, like you. He needed to escape now. Go to his laboratory and trust that Powder actually knew what she was doing. Victor let his crutch fall to his side. This experiment needed to work on the first iteration. His new leg and arm looked not too dissimilar to the night sky behind and before him. He let the hilt-over crutch fall, taking small steps like the child he had once been. The scientist of two worlds, his body modified with another place's magic, took a breath of the night air for good luck, and ran. He had paid for this in so much blood, and he would reap the reward he had from the Faustian bargain he had turned to as a means to save himself. While outpacing the ships in the river, who couldn't guess what was going on in the depths below them? Victor let out a wild yell. And that, my friends, was the end of the first part of part 4. Oh man, it was actually a little bit less in timing, technically, than the intermission. But I think that's just because we had so many breaks before and in-betweens of stuff for different people. We only have one more real chapter left. We do have an epilogue and stuff, but that is a whole separate thing, just to tie everything together rather than like our intermissions or the parts in between. So I think that's just getting everything together. And then that's it, y'all. So we're going to be finished with this. I think this is coming out on a Thursday. We'll be done with this by next week. So y'all, make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we will see you in the next chapter.